Hello and welcome back to another Demis Hellen tutorial. We are going to look at arpeggios today, and this video is going to cover a few different ways to approach arpeggiated sequences to spark interest to start a track. Arpeggios are always the perfect way for me to build a melodic idea or get a track idea started in my head just by browsing through some ARP presets and then finding one that sparks some interest and working from there. It doesn't mean that I'm going to use that preset in the final track, but it's there just to get that baseline area going so I can build on that foundation idea. Sometimes that preset does stay in there. It's actually a really nice sounding preset. It's really relatively simple, and I can just leave it in there and it becomes part of the track, as long as it fits, of course. Now, every time you load an arpeggiated preset, you need to be asking yourself some questions every time. How was it made? What effects were used to shape the sound? Was it a waveform used or was it a wavetable? What modulation is happening to create the sound? And how simple is the sequence, or is it down to delay and other modulation that is helping create that sound into a more complex rhythm? There are so many questions that you can throw at presets, but once you know, you will always know. And the next time it comes around to creating a sound, or you want a certain groove, things will be a little bit easier to approach because you know the base parameters of the sound that you liked and you can recreate it pretty quickly. A creative choice you need to make as well is, do you want the groove to be bouncy or straight? We're not going to get into great depth on how to manipulate this, but it does determine the rest of your elements in your track. For example, a typical 138 style track will be pretty straight in groove. Maybe the melodic sequence or the percussion might have a little bit of swing to it to create a bit of groove, but compared to progressive trance, for example, this has a much more swung feel, has more of a groove, and can borderline into that kind of funk house and house genre. Now that's enough of me chatting about arpeggiators. Let's have a look at the ones on screen that we have. So I've got a few ideas here, and we aren't going to go into how to create them on the presets, but we are going to look at how to use them and understand them. So there are a few ways that we can use arpeggiated sequences and get to that final stage of an arpeggiated sequence. We can use an arpeggiator plugin that's dedicated to producing MIDI notes from the insert channel, and that could be, say, Cthulhu from Xfer Records. We're not going to look into that. If you want to see that, we've already done that in a video, and that is on screen now. We can use the arpeggiator built into a synth. We can use our own MIDI, drag and drop MIDI, or build our own. Or we can use MIDI effects. So there are a few different ways that we can approach this, but they can all result in the same thing. Now on screen, you can see here we have some ARP presets. We're going to walk through each one. We've got one in Spire here, Synthmaster 1, then we have another from Synthmaster 1, and then we have two from Rapid, just to vary it up a little bit so we're not just working in the same synth. It's for no particular reason, it's just to show you that. And they do have different built-in arpeggiators, so we could quickly look over that as well. First up, we have Spire. Now, this is an example of loading in a preset and getting some ideas straight off the get-go. So we're going to put this down to 138, because I've noticed I typed 148 in there. And let's have a look in the synth. I've loaded this preset here, and this is out of my euphoric trance bank, so if you want to grab a copy of that, you can find the link in the description as always, or on screen at the beginning of every video. As you can see, we have Spire open and the arpeggiated sequence open, so don't be put off by this. This is just a preset, and we're going to look at what I was talking about earlier about rolling back the ideas. Okay, so relatively simple. I'm just going to double click these to return to 0. Now that can spark some ideas. You could come back from that and go, I can hear the perfect bass, I can hear the perfect kick and snare that's going to go with that. Things start to spark. If it doesn't spark anything, move on to the next preset till you hit something that you like. Now, we talked about rolling back, asking questions at the beginning of the video. How was it made was the first question. Let's have a look at how it was made. You can see here we have two oscillators, so we're just going to quickly fly over this because we've done a few synth videos already, and there's going to be a few in the future anyway. We have two oscillators, and you can see here the first one is a saw wave set to classic. The next one is an AM sync, and then a little bit of shaping done there. So just have a mess around with these settings when you are looking into it, see how they get manipulated. Each oscillator has its own parameters here in this section from detune, density and wideness. And you can see here that everything is relatively simple, nothing changed on the unison mode. And again, nothing changed there. If you just switch between, just keep looking at the positions. So you go, okay, relatively easy preset. There isn't even a filter on this one. And that's something that usually doesn't happen in my preset design, but in this instance there is no filter on here, but it gives you the option to add it in yourself. Moving on, we have all 5 of our effects, and we look no shaping, no phase, no chorusing, and then we have some delay, and we have no reverb. So the delay here is just using 8th notes, and if we hover over there we can see up in this little window that we have 8th notes selected. And then just have a look at the colour, the modulation, the rate, the feedback, how wide is the sound, how much dry wet is there. Take a look at all the settings, take it in and understand how it's affecting the signal path. Then we have our envelopes. You can see here it's just been left as standard on the envelope, and usually envelope 3 in this case is attached to the cutoff, but we don't have any filters. Then we can look at the arpeggiator. And in the arpeggiator we have this set of numbers at the top. Now, if you haven't used an arpeggiator built into a synth before, or you've not learnt it, this is probably the best time to start looking into it. And I'll just quickly walk you through how this is operating. You can see here we have a 0, and then we have -24 twice, then we have a 2, then we have 2 -24s, then a 3, and then it goes to a 5, 5, and a 7. And that is what is giving our notes. You can hear it's climbing up, but the bass notes are staying the same. Now it's relatively simple. We look at the 0 and we've got our note here set to C. So that first note is at 0, so it's starting on the root note, the C. Then -24 is 2 octaves below, so it's a C, but it's 2 octaves below. Moving on to the 2, that is 2 semitones up from the note of C. So that will be C sharp, D. So if you look at this on a piano roll, you'll be able to count them individually, or on the keyboard in front of you, you can just count from C and count all the notes 1 semitone at a time. So from C to C sharp, to D sharp, to E to F, and so on. Don't be scared of the arpeggiator, just have a mess around, rework some patches and understand how they've been programmed. You can see that's relatively easy once you see that there. There are a few extra features. We have some velocity values here. That's how loud and soft the notes are based on velocity sensitivity. And we have accent marks here as well. So if we wanted to accent, say, each offbeat, like so, it will now accentuate those. If we take them away, so it adds a little bit more dynamic and depth and interest in your sound. Then we have the gate and the swing. Long notes, really short notes. The timing, so if we chose 8ths, that would be half the speed. All relatively simple stuff. Once you've learnt it, you know it. Then swing offers a little bit of groove. And don't forget we have all the modes here, so it's on step mode at the moment. We'll look at the up, up, down, etc. features in the next synth. Same thing, just a different synth. Moving on to Synthmaster, we can preview this sound like this. Now this is just rolling, there's no preset pattern in there, and that's because we've set this to the up feature. Now if we go to the arpeggiator in Synthmaster 1, looks a little bit daunting, looks a little bit different, but if we click the plus button to expand this, you can see it's got no preset notes in whatsoever, it's just a rolling note. So let's take a look at the settings here. We can see it's on step velocity, but on the mode it's set to down. Now if we look before, we had it on sequence, so if we click sequence, we can draw notes in and we can add that same pattern that we just had. If we so wish to do so, we could just copy it into here. And the beauty of this is we can drag and drop MIDI samples into this as well. So we could take this MIDI we're going to look at next, just literally drag and drop it and it will work in there. And we can also drag and drop MIDI. Well, drag and drop, I say, you go here and you can import MIDI sequence once you've exported it to your desktop or wherever you store them. So we're going to take this back to down mode. Now, this means that the arpeggiated sequence is going to go down, but at the moment, it's just hitting those notes. So if you're not familiar with this, jump into your piano roll and pick a standard 3-note chord. So I'm just going to pick out of the C section here. So we've got C, E and G, bog standard chord. Now we have an arpeggiated pattern. Now this works on a different principle, that you don't put the preset notes in, but when you hit the chords, it will automatically move in a sequence between those notes that you have selected. And at the moment, we're on down mode. So we can choose up mode here. So now the chords are rolling upwards, back to down. And then we can choose a variety of different ones, up, down and up, down 2, down, up and down, up 2 as well. So now it's just going up and down 2. Down, up, which is just the reverse of the up, down. Let's put it on up, because this is it's like the most common, shall I say. Now, we can change this rhythm to add extra notes in, so we can make this pattern sound different. So if we duplicate the C note and put it an octave lower, we get a different pattern again. And if we duplicate the 2 top notes here and put them down here as well, now we have 6 notes. So now you're getting that starting, that rising feeling. So we could add more in. And it's entirely up to you how many notes you put in or which notes that you put in. And at the moment this is set to 8. So let's choose 16 steps. So it lets that rise up further. And you can create some really interesting sounds. And that is the simpler way of creating the art presets. If we just jump back into Spire here, you can see if we choose down here mode, we have those same modes, up, down, down, etc. So most built-in synth arpeggiators, if they have one, will do that. The third way that we can approach a MIDI arp is to actually draw it in ourselves. So here I've drawn in a relatively simple up sequence. So it's doing a very similar thing to what the actual synth was doing in the last one when we just used the up preset, but we can actually see it and we have more control over it. We can hit J on the keyboard in Cubase, select everything, and we can actually edit the size, we can edit the velocities, so we have more control over the sound pretty quickly as well. That was really quick to get to that point that I've just done there. The only downside is if you're not too musically minded in terms of theory, you're not going to be able to do that without the aid of other plugins, but there are things like Cubase's Chord Track, Cthulhu can help you there as well, scalesandchords.com, I always recommend that, and various other websites as well that can help you understand your chord structures and your scales. But the other reason that you could do this is you can have preset MIDI that you can just drag and drop into your DAW and it'll appear on your screen, and then you can study it. So you can go in, you can go, how have they made that? There we are, we can see exactly what they've done, and we can recreate it in our own way. We could have it side by side so we can see the original and build our own. Now, I have built a few variations here, so let's have a look at variation number 1. We can see here that we've removed that third note. So before we had this note here, just quantize that. So we had that E there like this. Let's remove that. We've still got an arpeggiated sequence, it's just a lot simpler, but we've added a bass note in. So if we just make this window a little bit bigger, it's a bit smaller. You can see here now I've added a bass note, but I've offset where that E was. So if we go back there, that E was filling that gap at every point. Now you can see the bass notes are filling that gap at every point, just to vary it up a little bit. Otherwise, it sounds like this. There's no problem with that, but it just sounds a little bit better and a little bit more dynamic having that in there. Next, we have variation number 2, and you can see it's exactly the same as the first, but I've changed note here. Instead of it going to here, it's just returning back down to the C, but we've added 2 notes. So now instead of just having these notes that we had from the previous version, we've now got these extra notes before it. And this is just showing you how variations work and how to develop your own style. These aren't super complex arpeggios, but nonetheless arpeggios. Then you can see from version 3 here, we have a little bit more of a complex design. And we can take this idea and we can manipulate it how we want. So we could drag this up here. And we can start working with that sound. We can think, oh, that sounds, it's a little bit too high on there. So I'm just going to drop everything 1 octave. And just doing that can give you a whole different sound to your track or to the ideas that you were looking for. I can't recommend enough just moving the octaves around and things like that. You can see we have the same idea here. We have the C and the G, and before we still had that E there. That would have been our original uprising arpeggio. And you can see instead of the E being in that position, we've got the F but an octave higher in that position. And I'm not going to go into the reasons why F is there or why it's been chosen. It's just by ear. It just sounded good by ear for this demonstration, and that's where it's sat. There's plenty of music theory things out there for you to look over. But nonetheless, we've varied the pattern. Instead of that middle note being here, it's now an octave above, and then we've transposed it to F. It was on E before. So if you wanted to put it on E for ease of use, so instead of having it there, it can sound a lot thicker, it can add a bit of muddiness into your track, and it just might all sound not as defined. Where everything now is split up and you can start to hear each individual note a little bit clearer. Then we put a little bit of a variation in there just to show that we can start developing an idea. Do we like that? Maybe not. We can change it. And then finally we have this one. Now the reason for this one is just to show you the use of velocity values. A lot of presets, if you've got decent designed presets, you're going to have velocity sensitivity. Now you can see here that I've used some quite low velocity values. So that's just the loudness of each note. And we have one very loud note and then one medium loud note, we'll say. And you can hear that they stand out a mile from the rest of the sequence. And that's because that one is louder and all the rest are quieter. If we take a look at the preset, working our way back, we say we've looked at all the oscillators and the filters and we've gone, right, we know how that works. If we hit the mod matrix, we can see here that we have velocity in source 3. That is attached to the filter cutoff and it's up. So look up there, up at the top here, it's up about plus 26, so about 27. That's about 27%, let's say. And what that's doing is adding extra control over the velocity. So when you have quieter notes, if you want things to pop out a little bit more or just be accentuated, that's going to give you that option. Let's go back into here and drop those notes so they are similar to their counterparts. So this note's still obvious in the sequence, but let's just say that we wanted to emphasize the bass notes a little bit more. We can actually just undo that. We can bring all the volumes up at the same time once selected, and I'm going to bring them up so they're considerably higher than the rest. Now we get a different rhythm, whereas if we return them to a quieter level, we get a very different feel. Those lower notes are essentially not there. You can hear them just, but they're not contributing massively to the melody. So just the idea of raising the volumes a little bit gives you a little bit more control over your sound. And next we're going to use the rapid demo that we have set up here, and this is the effects arp. So you can see here That is called effects arp, and there's nothing happening. We can see in Rapid itself. Don't be too confused by Rapid here, but if we click on the arp, it's not even activated and there's nothing programmed in there. So let's have a listen to what's going on. So you can hear we've got this arpeggiated sequence, but we've got nothing in the synth itself, and we've got nothing here definitely. So what's happening? Well, this is down to the MIDI inserts. So you will have a MIDI insert feature somewhere on your DAW. In Cubase, it's just down the left-hand side in this inspector panel. Once you click MIDI inserts, you can see we have a step designer in there, and there's a variety of other MIDI inserts as well. Another great one in there is to use the quantizer as a side note to add some swing into your sound if you want it to sound a little bit more human. When we open the step sequencer, we are presented with this screen. You can see here we've got the same structure as what we had in the Synthmaster demo above, using the MIDI in the piano roll. Minus that end note, but it's the same pattern. Now, that is a really simple way to use a MIDI insert, and you can see here we have 32 separate steps, so we can create some quite complex sounds there. And as you can see, we have 32 steps, so we can create some quite complex MIDI rhythms there. We also have the volumes down here, and we have all these other settings as well. We have velocity, gate, brightness. We have all different settings down here to manipulate sound. We can reverse that so it'll fall instead of rising. There's so many things that we can do in there. We've got swing functions, we've got timing functions, we've got number of step functions. There's all sorts in there. So if we wanted to add more steps in, we can just click and add more. Say we want 5 steps. We can add that in there. So it'll do that now. We'll take that one out, drop it down to 4. And obviously you can load presets in there as well. And finally, to close the tutorial down, we are going to look at this last section here. And we're going to look at waveforms, wavetables, effects, things that will enhance your arpeggiated sequences. So let's take a look at Rapid in depth. We've just got a basic preset loaded here, and you can see it's set to Basic Sounds 1. Now, don't be put off by how complex this looks. Just look at the waveforms here for now. Relatively simple. Now, the sound of your arpeggio can change dramatically by the sound of your presets. If I sweep here to a square, you can see now we're on the square. Move into a triangle, and finally a sine. All of them give very different sounds. Now we can balance these between, so say we want some square and some saw. We can have a hybrid of both there as it's starting to blend together, and it gives you a totally different sound. Now these are great ways, and it's a very simple way of showing you how to morph the sound to fit your track. If it sounds a little bit too obvious in the track and it doesn't quite fit, you can change the wavetable, the waveform, and manipulate it with various things. We can add effects in here, and we can say sync bend A. You can see how gently you can turn these and change that sound dramatically. There are so many different ways to approach the sound design that contributes to the arpeggiated sequence. So quickly, I'm going to set up a filter here, and I'm going to set up a nice cut off but plucked sound. And there we are, we have a plucked sound. Now we have the effects down here, so if you're not familiar with Rapid, the effects are all loaded in this section, and we can have up to 8 effects. The first thing is the obvious thing, delay. So we'll pick the mono delay to start with. This can add tons of energy into an arpeggiated sequence for trance. Let's just cut some of the low end out. Bit more stereo, bit more modulation, bit more feedback. You can hear we've created something quite interesting, and we can change that to ping pong. It's kind of going back and forth in your ears. If you've got headphones on, you'll be able to hear that better. And we can change the timing, so if we wanted it eighths but we wanted it dotted, we get a different effect there, and triplets. And we can set that to quarters. So we can create really rapidly complex sounds in a matter of seconds just using some delay. So take into account, is that arpeggiated preset sounding really good because it's got a ton of delay on it that accentuates some of the sounds. Now if we actually go in here and make this a little bit more stuttered, so we just have a few gaps in there, that's all. So we have something like that. Now you can hear now we've put a dual delay on, which is left and right, so it's the same controls, but you can see we have the option to have two different timings on here. We can jump in and we can set that to eighths like it's already on, and that's on dotted. We could set it to dotted fourth. You can hear we can create some complex ideas there as well by using some stereo delay. And we can use plenty of different effects. There's all sorts of things. Each synth comes with its own. You can design it in there. You can design it in the drop down menus for your inserts and use your third party plugins. There's so many ways that we can do this. There's nothing stopping you putting flanging on. We can do some modulation there. We can modulate certain parameters in there, but it's touching on preset designs. So really, you need to watch some of my preset design videos. I'll put the playlist on screen for you. But delay is the most obvious one here that we use to enhance that. And you can use multi-tap delays. I did a video on that as well if you want to go and check that out. And finally, if you are looking for an arpeggiator preset to put on your inserts, or you want to use a MIDI one that you're not happy with the one that's built into the DAW, there is a link at the top of the description. It's the very first link, and it takes you to a link that shows you all the best Arpeggiator VST plugins that you can get. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you found this useful, let me know down in the comments. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm always available and I always get back to everybody. It might not be straight away sometimes, but I always do get back to comments. Hitting the like button also helps. Share the video around with like-minded producers. And finally, hit subscribe and the bell icon so you see those 3 videos per week on various trance topics, music production and reviews. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.